Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're trying to get to 2200 rapid elo, while I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. Today we have a Sicilian defense, and I'm going to play the Mengorini Sicilian, the A3 Sicilian, whatever you want to call it. And my opponent plays the knight c6 line, which can lead to some very interesting positions if he goes ahead and takes on b4, but he doesn't. And we have had people take on b4 previously in the speed run. Well, it's actually not a speed run, but also in the playlist that I'll have below with all of my games in the A3 Sicilian. And I initially learned this from a Gotham chess course. I think it's like E4 New York style or something. I don't know if it's changed at this point, but it's a fantastic course in my opinion. So I have to give credit where it's due. But I've definitely changed how I go about this opening over time. Not necessarily following everything that Levy recommends. But in this position, you have to realize what the point of b4 actually is, because in one sense, yes, you want to get this line with take, c3 and d4, which again we have had previously. But what if black doesn't take, right? Like, are we going to take on c5? You can, and I think it's kind of viable, but you are helping black's development. So I think it makes more sense to go b5. And getting this pawn to b5 is very nice because you can chase this knight around the center. This pawn is defended by the bishop, so that's not a problem. And in many cases, you can still get the big center with pawn d4, which is the same idea as if black were to play take, knight takes, and pawn c3 with tempo on the knight going d4. It's the same concept, right? Even if black doesn't take, we can go b5 to force the knight to d4, play c3 with tempo on the knight. You know, normally the knight would be on b4. In this case, it's on d4. And then we get to go d4 very quickly. Okay, that is not a good move. I don't understand this. After queen takes, I just go knight c3. Defending e4 and disconnecting the queen from the rook. I'm not too sure what the point is because none of black's other pieces can get out. I'm going to go knight f3, kicking away the queen, and I'm going to be up a knight. I mean, of course, the problem for black is that his knight is trapped. His knight has nowhere to go, right? Like, what often happens in these positions is if black doesn't accept this pawn, sometimes you'll get something like, I think pawn d6 is one of the main moves. And then like b5, knight d4, pawn c3, and knight e6. So the knight has the safe square on e6. But yeah, my opponent has essentially fallen for a trap. Goes knight to f6. We can kick the queen away. We don't have to defend this pawn just yet, because of course if knight takes, then we take the queen. And if queen takes, he loses the queen. And he's going to give me the queen. Wait, is the queen... No, the queen isn't trapped. But I mean, the only square is d6, and then I get... and then if the queen goes to d6, we just get pawn e5 with another fork. Okay, this is hilarious. Okay, let's go knight d5. If you take, I'll fork more of your pieces. Bit confused as to why my opponent's playing on, but I'm not complaining, I suppose. We've just got a completely winning position. Pawn d3. I mean, we're up a whole queen. Yeah, I suppose I will probably pause the video, play out the rest of the game, show you the game quickly, and then we'll hop into a second one. Okay, to be honest, I could have kept that recording because that was pretty quick. But let's just jump into a very brief analysis. 99.2% accuracy. It was a very short game, so it doesn't mean a whole lot. But yeah, we have this A3 Sicilian. Like I said, I've got a whole... Sorry, I think the mic cut out. But I have a playlist below with all of my games in the A3 Sicilian. So if you want to check that out, then go for it. Which includes these sorts of positions. We can get very nice positions after like d5, take, knight a3. We've had some very nice games on this series already in those positions. But here my opponent goes e6, which is fine. Like, objectively, black is slightly better after pawn to b5. The knight needs to go basically anywhere other than d4. Of course, d4 is the most natural looking move. I mean, the engine wants the knight to go to e7. And after something like bishop b2, pawn d5, pawn a4, wants to sack the pawn, and then go d3. Not sure I would personally play this, to be honest, although you can see the benefit of it after the pawn sacrifice. But yeah, knight d4 simply blunders the knight. The knight has nowhere to go, so my opponent tries queen to f6, but yeah, after knight c3, I mean, what are you going to do? As I mentioned before, e6 isn't a very common line. Often you'll get something like d6 if black doesn't want to accept the pawn. And after like b5, knight d4, c3, the knight can go to e6. We get to go d4, and, you know, we get this big center. Black can try and lash out, but d5 is often a mistake because of the simple pawn e5. And the black position is very cramped in lots of cases. This knight still doesn't really have any good moves. And the best move in this position for black is f6, which is a massive commitment. Massive commitment. So, yeah, knight d4, black loses the knight. We go knight c3, defending everything. And then the queen is trapped. Like, the only way to save the queen is queen d6, and then you give up the knight. I mean, the engine actually wants me to go pawn b6 here, and then take. So I suppose we can get rook b1 in. But it's just horrific. Yeah, my opponent tries his best, but he's down a whole queen. We force more trades, and then the game ends with pawn d3, pawn b6, bishop h6, and we have an unstoppable mate in 8 moves. But my opponent makes it very easy for me by allowing this check and resigns, because the only move is king h8, and then we will checkmate on g7. So very, very easy game, I suppose. And one, I think this shows the power of the A3 Sicilian, which, again, I learned from Gotham Chess. Fantastic course. I assume he still has it. It's been a long, long time since I've actually looked at it, like years. But it's very, very good. And with that being said, let's jump into a second game, because that was very quick. Okay, so we have pawn d4. We're going to go pawn c6. And we have another Slav defense, which we've had quite a few of in recent videos. Knight c3, knight f6. This is pretty standard. You're likely to see a move like knight to f3, but my opponent takes. And I think a few videos ago, I took with the knight, knowing that it wasn't that good. I don't know why I did it. I knew it was wrong. You should take with the pawn here. And we got kind of trounced after knight takes e4, take. But yeah, this is just a Slav defense, exchange variation, nothing special. This is often considered to be like one of the most boring openings in chess. But I would say that that's not quite accurate. I think there can be a lot of play on the queen side in some of these lines. So we will see whether that will be the case. Let me think. Yeah, knight c6. We have to be very careful of the knight coming to b5 and c7, of course, because without the c6 pawn, we don't control the b5 square. However, knight to b5 doesn't work just yet. Can you figure out why? There's a tactical reason, and it's queen a5 check, because the knight is undefended, hitting the king, hitting the knight, and the knight would be forced back to c3 to block the check. Otherwise, it's going to get taken. So pawn e3, not only does it support d4, but it opens up this bishop, which is important, because now knight to b5 kind of can be played, because if queen to a5, the knight is defended by the bishop. So let's say we play something like, well, bishop f5 could be maybe risky because of queen to b3 ideas. We could consider going queen to b6 ourselves, but again, we have to watch out for knight to b5. How are we going to deal with that? Maybe we have to go e5, which isn't necessarily something that I want to do, because we will be sacrificing a pawn. But, you know, then we can get moves like bishop to b4 in, which look quite strong, in my opinion. So I think I will go queen b6, applying some pressure to the b2 pawn and just developing the queen. And this is what I mean by these exchange Slav positions being actually quite interesting, because with the loss of the c pawn for both white and black, the queen side kind of opens up because the queens get access very quickly to b6, a5, a4, and b3 because the c2 and c7 pawn respectively are gone. Both sides will most likely develop their bishops to f5 and f4, eyeing down the queen side. These knights can get involved very easily. Our dark squared bishop and light squared bishop, respectively, can also get involved after the e-pawn is moved. We haven't done it yet, but white has. And yeah, you can see how these positions can get very interesting. I think we can go pawn to e5 in this position, though. e5 looks very strong. Very, very strong. And it will remind you of like a fried liver sort of position, right? It's like the fried liver, but mirrored. As in, normally you get a bishop on c4 and a knight on g5 in the fried liver, and then black goes pawn d5, sacrificing a pawn to block the bishop's scope on f7, right? It's the same concept, but in reverse. Well, not reverse, but mirrored, where white has a bishop on f4, a knight on b5, and going after c7, and I'm going pawn e5, sacrificing a pawn to block off the diagonal. But I think we have some very, very nice counterplay with bishop to b4 check. We're getting ready to castle very quickly. This bishop can't retreat. This knight is forced back to c3. And now I think the fun starts because, I mean, to me, knight to e4 looks very strong. We probably forced the move knight to e2, which is not a move you really want to play. And then, I don't know, something like bishop takes, knight takes, queen b2 looks very strong. I mean, our knight is under attack. We probably do need to move it. d5 is weak. Like, for example, queen d5 could be played, but then white would lose the game immediately after knight takes c3, b takes c3, and bishop takes c3. So it's really not easy. And again, this is an exciting position. We had an exchange Slav defense, which is normally very boring, but this is certainly not boring. I don't think anybody would argue that this is a boring position. And we have so much pressure. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces developed. White only has 2. Yes, we're down a pawn, but I think it's very unlikely that we don't win the b2 pawn at some point. So, okay, knight to e2 as expected. Also, note, you don't have to say knight g to e2 because this knight can't go to e2 because it's pinned. Just, I don't know, little fun tidbit. So, okay, how are we going to continue? Well, taking with the knight feels wrong to me because after knight takes and knight takes, or even knight takes and pawn takes, I'm not really sure where our play is. I'm more so inclined to take with the bishop, and if knight takes, going queen to b2, because I feel like that gives us a lot of play. You know, you can't really take on d5 because you hang the knight, the rook is vulnerable. We have checks on c3 that we can use. I feel like that's quite nice. If bishop takes and pawn takes, which we do need to consider, maybe that's a better line for white. It looks better. Is it enough? I don't know. Maybe we can just go bishop e6 and say to white, okay, how are you going to continue this position? You may be up a pawn, but you have 2 very weak pawns and you can't develop properly because your bishop can't get out. And if you play a move like g3, then your bishop will get trapped with g5. So, I mean, speaking of, maybe we can go g5 straight away. Force the bishop back, go h5. I assume white has h4 in that position, though. What else can we do? I mean, we could go queen a5, just applying more pressure to the knight and defending d5. That's an interesting move. Queen a5, white needs to defend the knight. So let's say rook c1. And to be honest, I'd be tempted just to take on a2. Because the knight is pinned, so my queen can't be taken. And my queen keeps an eye on d5. And we're hitting b2. Now, if queen to a5, white could go queen to b3, defending a2, defending the knight, keeping an eye on the pawn. So something like this. But then bishop e6 looks very strong, threatening ideas of pawn to d4. And a3 is never really a problem, because if you take your rook will hang. So the more I'm looking at this, the more I'm leaning towards queen a5. And I think I should play it. I don't really believe I need to spend too much time on that. Queen a5 looks very strong to me. While I was wanting to go bishop takes, that was my initial idea. I do think pawn takes maybe keeps things together for white. Maybe. Like the weakness of my d5 pawn, maybe that's a problem. Maybe rook b1 will be strong. It's difficult to say. It's difficult to say. But I think this queen a5 move, it looks wrong because it's like, well, we've developed our queen to b6 already. Why are we moving it again? Like, why are we not bringing another piece into the party sort of thing? But I do like this position. Also, knight to c5 looks interesting. Hitting the queen and the d3 square. I suppose there is queen to d5. Although maybe we have bishop e6. We could go bishop e6 immediately, of course. White can't really block our advancement, which will be deadly. Because if knight to d4, take, and take looks game over to me. I think bishop e6 is the way to go. Now, knight c5 might be winning. Maybe bishop f5 followed by knight c5, or knight c5 followed by bishop f5, really going after this d3 square. But I don't see a way out for white here. I really don't. We're also preparing something like rook c8 to add even more pressure to this knight. I mean, let's say rook c1. Pawn d4, game over. The knight is hit, the queen is hit, the knight is pinned. There's nothing useful for white to counterattack. I mean, he could try rook c1, pawn d4, queen c2, hitting my knight. But after take, and take, it comes with discovered check. The rook is hanging. Game over. Game over. So, yeah, this looks really strong to me. And hopefully it highlights, like, the sort of interesting nature of the exchange Slav where the c-pawns are gone. Because, as I mentioned before, with the c-pawns being gone, it gives our pieces quick access to the queen side. And there can be lots of pressure down these respective diagonals as a result of that, right? And my opponent does go queen c2. But it also means that these checks can't be blocked with a pawn on c6 or c3. And I think that's really the crux of why these positions can be quite dangerous, because you need to block with a piece. And yeah, so here, you may be tempted to take here with a knight, but I think pawn takes in white is actually okay. I suppose if pawn d4, you can just take on d4. So maybe we should try bishop to f5. And the idea being that if the queen goes back to b3, then we can go knight c5. Because now it's different. Because now if something like queen takes, we can go knight d3 supported by the bishop. And also we have rook d8. And bishop f5 lines up a very nasty discovery. And I'm not sure how white stops this. Not sure how he stops this. Again, I'm playing with 5 pieces. I can add another one if I want via either c8 or d8, or I can castle and put my rooks on d8 and c8 and just really cause some problems for white. I also have a very mobile pawn on d5. This pawn can be shoved to d4 whenever I want. I know that the d4 square is very well supported, but it can open lines, right? It could open up the d file, for example. It could open up a diagonal, which is why white had to go queen to c2, because my pawn is too mobile. And yeah, I mean, white, I wouldn't say is playing with this bishop. This bishop is cut off from the rest of the board because it's trapped behind its own pawns, right? It's not really oh my god. It's not really participating in the queen side. So white is only really playing with 3 pieces on the queen side. He could add a 4th, but, you know, my immediate threat is too strong. And yeah, he goes queen back to b3. But I think knight c5 is game ending. Knight c5, queen d5, knight d3, king d1, knight f2, or rook d8, or basically anything is going to be winning. Basically anything. And also the queen is hanging. Yeah, the queen is just hanging. So you can't even take on d5. The queen d5, knight d3, check. If you move the king, I can just take the queen. Although maybe the knight can take back because the king will move to d1. If the king goes to d2, the knight is pinned. So the queen would be hanging. But if the king goes to d1, then knight f2 comes with check. Knight b2 comes with check. All of that looks losing. Also, if the king steps back to e1, then the knight is pinned. So that's also very nice. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far and haven't yet, I'd really appreciate if you could drop a like and subscribe. It does really help the channel, more than you might know. And also, we're at like near 18,000 subscribers. That's nuts. That's so cool. But yeah, knight to d3. You can see we are completely swarming the white position. This knight on e2 is blocking the ability of the bishop to participate in the game, which is allowing us to go knight d3. And here, we have a few options. We have to be slightly careful. Like, we shouldn't really do this, because after rook d8, I don't know, knight c7 is maybe annoying. So I'm also tempted to just take on f2 with check. King c1 looks forced, because if you go here, then your queen hangs and the knight is pinned. If you go to d2, same story. You can't go to c2 because my bishop covers c2. So c1 looks like the only viable square. I say viable in a very loose manner. We could even return to d3. I mean, I'm not really sure what we accomplish, but we can do that. We could also not take the queen. We could just take the rook, because our queen is well defended. Let me think, actually, because queen takes, knight takes, rook to... No, we can castle queenside. Take castle queenside. We have threats of rook d1 checkmate. If the knight returns back, then we just take this rook. Yeah, I think that's the way to go. Because he can't take my bishop. That's the point. Yeah, he can't take my bishop because rook to d1 is checkmate. Supported by the knight, and my bishop covers c2, which is the crucial square. So there is too much hanging in the white position. The knight is hanging, the rook is hanging, checkmate is hanging. And at the end of the day, the white pieces are not playing. The rooks are out the game, the bishop's out the game, this bishop's out the game. He's effectively playing with his knights, and that's it. Whereas we are playing with, well, not our h8 rook yet, but all the other 5 pieces are participating. So I'm not really sure how white defends this. If he tries a move like knight to c3, supporting this knight, well, knight e to c3. I mean, worst case scenario, I just take the rook. Yeah, and he does go for it. We can also take the knight. And after knight takes, take the rook, which looks fine to me. Trades are obviously good, because we're going to be up a rook. And yeah, now time for the cleanup, but my opponent resigns because at a, 2100 rating, the cleanup should not be any issue, considering white has 0 counterplay. So yeah, 2 very interesting games. First one, obviously, we won quite early on through a very trappy line. And this one, again, kind of a trappy line, like sacrificing a pawn to just smother the white position. Very happy with it. I'm not actually sure whether it's, like, objectively good. Maybe white missed a move, but I certainly didn't see a way out for white. Let's jump into the analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, so 74.9% accuracy for my opponent, 82.4 for us. It looks like there was one moment, like after we got a very big advantage, that we allowed white a chance which wasn't taken. So that'll be very interesting to see. But okay, d4, c6, c4, d5, and we have the exchange Slav. As I mentioned, taking with the knight is not good. I have done it on this series before. I don't know why I did. I just thought it'd be interesting, but we do not have sufficient counterplay in this position. I think we had this after bishop g4 and just got ourselves into a terrible position very, very quickly and got completely overrun by the bishop pair for white. So don't do that. Instead, take back with the c-pawn. Bishop f4, we go knight c6. I'm not comfortable going bishop f5 in these lines because of queen b3 targeting our b7 pawn. Because after something like queen b6, a b6, knight b5, knight a6, let's say, these positions look very uncomfortable to me. So I prefer to hold off on the development of my light square bishop and instead just go knight c6. The knight wants to go there regardless. As I mentioned, knight b5 is no good. The engine actually wants e5 in this position. And after de5, going knight to e4, similar to what we did in the game, preparing queen to a5 check. Because let's say knight f3 is played, then queen a5 check. The only way to save the knight is to drop it back. And then worst case scenario, we can play something like take, 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 and be up. Oh, apparently no, not that. d4. Okay, there's a lot of nuance, clearly. But, yeah, point is knight b5 is no good because of queen a5 check. And the only way to save the knight is to put it back on c3, and then you've just wasted 2 moves, and my queen is on a very nice square. So pawn e3, preparing knight b5 ideas. We go queen to b6, not the best move. a6 is good, bishop f5 is also good. Like I said, bishop f5, I get concerned about queen to b3 lines. The engine suggests knight a5, but, you know, I feel like it's difficult to play. But a6 is completely viable, which I know I have played in the past, just stopping anything from coming to b5. No bishop check, no knight b5. And after something like knight f3, bishop g4, h3, take, take, pawn e6, we give away the bishop pair, but we have a comfortable position. We replace our light square bishop by having lots of pawns on light squares. But queen b6, bishop d3 here is the best move. But my opponent goes knight b5. And it looks like everything is coming together. Now queen a5 check. I mean, it doesn't really work. You can go queen d2. And yes, we can make your king come to d2. Fantastic. We can even go knight e4 and force the king back to e1. But how do we defend c7? If you go e5, bishop takes, knight takes, de5, bishop b4, king e2, and we're just down a pawn. And f4 will support this pawn very easily. So, pawn e5. Again, reverse fried liver, essentially. And here, white has 2 options. Take with a pawn, take with a bishop. And apparently you have to take with a bishop. Apparently that's the only move. And after something like bishop b4 check, the knight has to go back to c3, allowing knight e4. After rook c1 defending the knight, knight e5, de5, and castles. Black is better, but white can survive. My opponent, however, took with a d-pawn. And I assume the problem is that it allows future d4 moves. So bishop e4 check is the way to go. And after knight c3, knight e4, you have to defend with knight e2. Rook c1 is also a move. Here we have g5, for example, but we also can play something like take, g5, bishop g3, h5, h4, knight g3, and if fg3, then queen e3 is devastating. So yeah, knight e4, he blocks. He defends with knight e2. Here, queen a5 is the mistake. Okay, so g5 is the way to go. Huh. If bishop g3, h5, h4... It's not knight g3, because knight g3, and that was what I had calculated. I thought going pawn to g4 was a waste of time and gives white a chance to consolidate. Which I'm correct in saying, but the point is bishop g4. And I considered this move, but I thought that my opponent could play pawn f3. But the point is that we can take on e3 with check. That's what I missed. And then we can also take on e5 with tempo. So if this, king f1, I mean, we're completely winning. We're up 1 pawn, but the white king is stranded, and the white pieces are not in good stead. Queen f4, let's say king g1. We have checkmate in 2 if the king goes back to e1. the knight is pinned. Pawn d4 will win the knight. But yeah, I went queen a5, and here white has one move to try and defend, which is pawn f3, which is a very strange move to play. And after knight c3, bc3, not knight c3, because I suppose I can take or not because of king f2. Okay, that's interesting. My opponent, however, chose to go queen b3, which I was very happy to see. I thought it was the most natural looking move. I was calculating rook c1, and I figured I could take on a2. Best move is g5, but queen a2 is also viable. Here, the only move for white is pawn f3, forcing my knight to make a decision. But he goes queen b3, and I go bishop e6, and the simple threat is pawn d4. Let's say you go f3 now. Well, it's too late because pawn d4. And your queen moves, and then I take, and then you can take my knight, but then I'll take on b2 a check, and you will lose your rook, and I will promote. So queen c2 is the best move. And I just go bishop f5. And I didn't see a way for white to defend. Because the queen... If the queen moves, I get this maneuver. So let's say queen c1 instead. So knight c5 doesn't come with tempo. Here the engine suggests g5, bishop g3, pawn d4 anyway. And after ed4, knight c3... If knight c3, then knight d4 going after c2. And if bc3, still knight d4. And if you take on b4, then queen b4. If you block with the queen, then what? Knight... Well, I suppose I can just play like take and knight c2. No, that's not good enough. Knight c2 immediately. And after king d2, rook d8, king c1, we just retreat our queen to a4. The rook is hanging, and we're down a... What are we down? A piece? But I guess rook c8 is also a big threat with pins. But my opponent goes queen b3, which allows knight c5. And yeah, my opponent took on d5, and we saw what happened after that. If the queen retreats, let's say to d1, we still go knight c3. Knight d3, and we take on f2. Or we take on b2. Or we just castle and say, okay, what are you going to do about it? White can't do anything. So my opponent takes on d5, knight d3, check, king d1. As I said, if the king goes here, then the queen hangs because the knight is pinned. So you have to go king d1. And, I mean, everything is winning. I chose knight to f2 because I figured it was the easiest way to win this after castle queenside. Because, as I said, if you take on b4, you get mated. So you can't do anything. You have to keep the e-file shut. And then I can just trade and be up a rook, and my opponent can resign. So, a very interesting game. Did give the game slightly away with queen a5. I will bear in mind those g5 ideas in future, which is very, very interesting. But I hope this was a useful video for you, and hopefully if you've stuck around all the way to the end, you found it very entertaining as well. If you want to see another very interesting game in the Slav defense, sorry about that, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of this climb to 2200, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.